Office Space is a workplace comedy about a guy that hates his job and finally snaps one day, but not in a post-Columbine sort of way. It's a massive cult classic now, even to the point that if you haven't seen the movie, you've still probably seen it referenced somewhere. On the surface, it seems like just a simple story about a guy doing some stuff with a vaguely anti-work message, but I want to explore what exactly the movie is saying between the lines. Before I get into it, you should watch the movie if you haven't already. This video is oops, all spoilers, and you should watch it regardless since it's a good movie. At the time of writing this, it's on Amazon Prime, or you can rent it from the conglomerate of your choice, or you can find it on DVD or Blu-ray somewhere. The opening sequence does a really good job establishing the tone for the movie. The characters we follow are stuck in traffic on their way to work, including our protagonist, Peter. He's just trying to get to work, but his lane is at a standstill while the other lane isn't. He gets into the other lane, but then that lane stops. It's a pretty good visual metaphor to describe Peter's situation at the beginning of the story. Peter gets to work and we get a second to absorb his daily environment.
Corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking. Just a moment.
Then we meet Bill Lumberg, the poster boy for everything that's wrong with the world. He reminds Peter to put his cover sheets on his TPS reports before sending them out.
Did you see the memo about this?
Then we meet Peter's other boss, who reminds him to put cover sheets on his TPS reports before sending them out.
Did you get that memo?
Then he gets a call from another boss telling him that he needs to put cover sheets on his TPS reports before. Peter's work friend Samir is dealing with yet another paper jam, while Michael has probably the worst pain of all.
Bolton?
He shares a name with evidently famous singer Michael Bolton.
So are you related to that singer guy?
No, it's just a coincidence.
My heart goes out to everyone with the famous name.
Why don't you just go by Mike instead of Michael?
No way. Why should I change? He's the one who sucks.
Wow, any relation? Probably not. By the way, the lady that asks him that is a coworker, so either they've never met, which is unlikely, or this is like the third time she's asking that this week. After coming back from their lunch/foreshadowing break,
I could program a virus that would rip that place off big time.
Tom, their coworker, warns them that Initech is bringing in consultants to do layoffs.
But what you're really doing is interviewing for your own job.
After bullying Tom about his invention,
Jump to conclusions, Matt.
That is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life, Tom.
Peter brings up a main theme of Office Space. What would you do if you didn't have to do anything?
Our high school guidance counselor used to ask us what you would do if you had $1 million. Didn't have to work. And then invariably, whatever you'd say, that was supposed to be your career. So if you wanted to fix old cars, then you're supposed to be an auto mechanic.
I think each character's response demonstrates a different way that we're affected by capitalism. Samir is conditioned to think about how he would use the money to make more money.
I would invest half of it in low-risk mutual funds.
Michael is driven to a cynical state.
You're working at Initech because that question is bullshit to begin with.
Lawrence, the best character, gives my favorite response.
2 chicks at the same time, man.
It's about the simple things, man. Peter is so drained by the system that he feels like he just wants to do nothing. Even though we see later on, it's not that he wants to do nothing, it's just that he doesn't want to work. So his answer shows how activity is framed as either productive or nothing. Back at home, Peter knows that he's going to be asked to come in on Saturday, so his neighbor Lawrence tells him how to get out of it.
When a boss wants you to work on Saturday, he generally asks you at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So all you gotta do is avoid them. That's all right, I got it. On the last few hours on Friday, duck out early, turn off your answering machine. You should be home free, man.
So the next day, Peter does a work day, tries his best to sneak out, but Lumberg catches him and asks Peter to come into work on Saturday and Sunday. That night, Peter goes to a hypnotherapist and we get a Captain America-esque origin story for Peter's character for the rest of the movie. The hypnotherapist puts him in a trance that melts away all of his dread, fear, and anxiety, and just before he's about to take him out of it, the therapist just drops dead unexpectedly. Peter goes home and sleeps in until a healthy 3:30 p.m., and after sleeping in for probably another couple of hours, Peter heads to Tchotchke's and hits on the waitress Joanna.
Would you like to have lunch with me?
Are you serious?
It was a different time. Joanna meets Peter at the restaurant down the street and they hit it off. Peter asks her about her job.
Blair.
She asks about his.
It doesn't really matter.
And Peter decides that he just doesn't want to go to work anymore.
I'm not gonna go.
Then they bond over their shared interests.
I love Kung Fu.
Peter goes back to the office to get his address book, and Michael reminds him that he's supposed to be interviewing with the consultants. So Peter goes in and chads his way through the interview. They ask him about his workday, and he tells them the absolute truth.
I generally come in at least 15 minutes late. I use the side door. That way Lumberg can't see me. And after that, I just sort of space out for about an hour. I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
Now, I love everything about this scene, from the way Peter pours himself a drink in a "you guys don't scare me" kind of way, to when he cuts off the meeting to just go do whatever he wants. The Bobs are impressed by his confidence, and they tell Lumbergh that he's upper management material. Now, I love the Bobs so much. I mean, the amount of personality that's conveyed when one Bob has to hold the other one back in this shot is so hilarious to me. The Bobs turn the tables on Lumbergh when they ask him how much time he spends each week just dealing with TPS reports. Now, in an earlier scene, we already saw them ask Tom a similar question.
What would you say you do here?
But you don't usually expect that kind of questioning to be directed at management, and you can tell Lumbergh didn't expect it either. Now that we're at about 3 o'clock on the hero's journey wheel, we see a montage of Peter living his new life away from work. And even when he does decide to stop by, he's transforming the environment around him, fixing the door of electric death, dismantling his cubicle board by board, wiping his ass with the TPS cover sheets in a metaphorical sense, and slapping fish skeletons on them in a literal sense. Epic PC gamer Peter meets with the Bobs, and they tell him that his friends Samir and Michael are going to be laid off while he gets promoted. So Peter tells them, since they're his boys, and they devise a plan to do what's called a salami slice scheme.
What it does is every time there's a bank transaction where interest is computed, and there are thousands a day, the computer ends up with these fractions of a cent, which it usually rounds off. But what this does is it takes those little remainders and puts it into an account.
This sounds familiar.
Yeah, they did in Superman 3.
It's risky, though. You don't want to be caught stealing from your workplace like that. This is an LMG, after all. But they figure that Initech is so backed up with Y2K prep that such a small amount of money wouldn't even be noticed. And even if they were caught, the worst that would happen is they would just be sent to white-collar Wall Street jail. So now it's time for the big heist. One thing I love about this movie is how it shows mundane stuff like installing a program, edited as if they were infiltrating the Pentagon.
Damn, I'm such a G. It's pathetic.
And the next scene is the boys beating the shit out of the office printer like it owes them money. God, I love this movie. Tom, the guy from earlier in the movie, you know, the one that was like, there's gonna be layoffs,
We're all screwed.
gets a settlement after being hit by a drunk driver. His body is broken, but now he doesn't have to work and he can actually put his energy into his passion project. This scene serves to show Peter that if he doesn't get out now, what happened to Tom will be the best case scenario for him.
Just remember, if you hang in there long enough, good things can happen in this world. I mean, look at me.
Now, the next bit is my least favorite part of the movie. They do that sitcom trope where the creep from the office is like,
Lumbergh fucked her.
but it's a different Lumbergh. Peter thinks it's his boss, but since no one wants to use first names, apparently, Peter gets mad at Joanna, Joanna gets mad at Peter, and it all just feels like it's so he can get to the next plot point. Now, Joanna has her own issues at work. She works at one of those restaurants that isn't confident enough in its product that they have to have, like, a theme. Her boss wants her to wear more than the minimum, like her coworker Brian. She gets fed up, gives her boss what for, and quits. Then Peter checks the balance on their bank account and the boys panic because it's way higher than it's supposed to be. What's worse is that Tom's lawyer told Samir and Michael that if they were to hypothetically let's just say, if they were to steal a bunch of money from Initech, they wouldn't go to white collar minimum security prison. They would go to prison like from the movies. Michael suggests they launder the money, but the do-it-yourself at-home money laundering scheme known as Bitcoin won't be invented for another decade. So the next best option, I guess, is to admit every detail of their federal crime to someone that they just met who they think is a former drug addict in hopes that he can connect them with someone that actually does know about money laundering. The truth is, though, he was a former Innitrode employee, and he just plays a character to sell magazine subscriptions.
I make more money selling magazine subscriptions than I ever did in Innitrode.
This part is actually important, though, because it plants the idea that there are more employment options beyond office worker or criminal, which sets up Peter's decision at the end of the movie. Now, Peter has hit a new low at this point. He's driven everyone away, and he realizes he fucked up, so he decides to take the fall for the scheme. He tells Joanna that he's taking the fall, admitting that she was right when she told him what he was doing was wrong.
You were right about that computer scam. That was a bad idea.
This scene sets up the ultimate message for the movie. Work sucks, but you just gotta, do what makes you happy and love people.
Peter, most people don't like their jobs. But you go out there and you find something that makes you happy.
Peter drops off his confession in Lumbergh's office, and he's about to turn himself in, but it turns out that Milton, who I didn't really have time to talk about, goes back to get his stapler, burn the building down, take the money, and run. At the end of the movie, Peter gets a new job working with Lawrence in construction, while Samir and Michael work at Innitrode, which is basically like a palette swap of Initech. And this scene really feels like a commercial for the construction industry, in a similar way that Marvel movies are like a commercial for the military.
Making bucks, getting exercise, working outside.
Fucking A.
fucking A.
Anyway, more Milton and roll credits. Office Space is an incredible comedy, there's no disputing that. Not only is it hilarious, but the subject matter is very relatable. Critical reception is generally positive, and it's even more beloved by commoners. It's become a massive cult classic, and it's influenced so many corners of our culture because pretty much everyone can see themselves in it. Even if you haven't had to directly deal with a paper jam specifically, you can still relate to it on some level. And after showing us our frustrations, the movie lets us relish in their destruction. In a way, it's like a power fantasy when Peter comes back after his rebirth and dismantles the symbols of his oppression. I can confidently say that every working person has had at least one cubicle, figurative or literal, that they wish they could dismantle, or one boss they wish they could just... Now, being a workplace comedy of its kind necessarily means it will have something to say about our capitalist system, whether or not you think it is, it's trying to, or it should. If you only want to view Office Space as a comedy about smashing printers, that's fine, end the video here. The way I see it though, Office Space is setting out to say something about, and bear with me, society. First, and I want to get this out of the way, Office Space and stories like it do have some level of political messaging, whether or not it's purposeful. A lot of it lies in the underlying universal assumptions that the writers make about the world when writing the story, and how willing they are to question those assumptions. Let's look at The Matrix, for example. The setup is very similar. Peter Gibbons and Thomas Anderson are both software engineers working at a big, soulless corporation within a system that leeches your very life force. But from here, the two stories go in completely different directions. The Matrix is all about questioning the world around you, while Office Space is a very vote blue interpretation of the premise. With the help of Morpheus, Thomas frees himself and completely becomes his true self, Neo. The Wachowskis, the writers and directors of the Matrix movies, are more than willing to question the system, i.e. societal and economic power structures and imposed limits on our identities. Office Space, on the other hand, fully operates within the system, and it's not something you can be neutral on. You either accept the status quo or you reject it to one degree or another. Peter, Samir, and Michael all hate their jobs, but they're complacent until Peter goes to the hypnotherapist and he releases Peter from all his inhibitions. Along with the layoffs, this is the catalyst for the scheme they execute.
So you're stealing.
Joanna challenges the morality of the scheme, and this is where one of my issues with the movie surfaces. I would have liked to see this treated more so as like an outlaw story, but the movie goes out of its way to tell us how bad it would be to hurt a massive corporation that has wage theft at best.
I'm gonna need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow.
And outright uses slave labor at worst.
I haven't received my paycheck this week.
Now, I'm not condoning embezzlement of any kind, and I'm not even saying the outcome should be any different.
Pound me in the ass, prison.
However, I'd say that if we're comparing ethics, Initech is way more in the wrong. After all, we don't see Robin Hood as a villain robbing the poor innocent king. After Initech mysteriously burns down along with all incriminating evidence, Peter gets a new job working in construction with Lawrence. It seems like a happy ending, but Peter's problems are far from over. He still works a full-time job, he's just traded the cubicle for a shovel. Lawrence even mentions early on in the movie how exhausting his job is.
Oh, I gotta wake my ass up at 6 a.m. every day this week.
Peter will likely be just as discontent at his new job as he was at his old one. And even if he is happy now, there are millions of other Peters being coerced into putting the majority of their waking time and effort into making corporate profits go up, while being compensated with just enough to survive another day, if that. Workplace comedies have this tendency to fall victim to survivor's bias. In these stories, work sucks, but ultimately all you have to do is just pull on some bootstraps and do what makes you happy. But these stories are being told by people that get to make movies for a living. It's not always glamorous, but they're living so many people's dreams. And even if they struggled as a peasant earlier in their lives, they still managed to get out. They don't live the dead-end paycheck-to-paycheck reality that so many of us find ourselves stuck in. Essentially, they won. So it feels a little hollow to tell people that aren't born into Hollywood royalty, don't happen to be friends with Steven Spielberg's stylist, or live in Iowa, that all they have to do is just get the job they want and be happy. And the real solution to many of our frustrations in the workplace is systemic change. Stronger unionization, a higher minimum wage tied to inflation, and overall a more democratic power structure are great ways to make work better. This is even alluded to when Peter is interviewing the Bobs. Peter expresses that he has so many bosses constantly on him and he has no material incentive to do more than the bare minimum.
Now, if I work my ass off and Initech ships a few extra units, I don't see another dime. So where's the motivation?
Bob asks Peter if he'd be interested in some kind of stock option profit sharing program, and his answer is, I don't know, I guess. But the answer is absolutely yes, that's a great step. But that's a microcosm of another issue that I have with Office Space. For a movie that rips off Marx's talking points, it doesn't seem really interested in systemic analysis. Every problem is individual, and thus every solution starts and ends at the individual. It's the same motivating logic behind the Ben Shapiro moment when he said that you should just sell your house if it goes into the ocean. Who's going to buy your newly aquatic house, and who's going to take your job that sucks so much? Now, you might be inclined to think that considering all this hippie shit would bog down the comedy or make the movie feel too preachy or political. If you're worried about Office Space getting political, I can assure you that ship has sailed.
We don't have a lot of time on this earth. We weren't meant to spend it this way.
The seeds for a lot of what I'm saying are already in the movie. The setup is there, but the follow-through is lacking. It feels to me like they changed the plot trajectory so the political messaging appeals to the average Clinton voter. Overall, I'd just like to improve that messaging. Currently, one of the main takeaways from the movie is that if your job sucks, you should just go out, find another one, and be happy. Individually, this isn't bad advice, kind of like how if you're depressed, it's a good idea to go outside. But it's not the end-all be-all. If it was me making the movie, I would express that we need not only individual change, but also systemic change. Maybe instead of working in construction, Peter starts a new company with Samir and Michael, and they learn from what they hated about Initech. Now, that's not perfect either, but it's a step in the right direction. I'd at least like for the movie to question capitalist power structures instead of making it out like the problem is the particular guy in charge. Like I was saying earlier, it's all about the assumptions that storytellers make about the world. Bosses are fine, capitalist power structures that resemble feudalism or outright dictatorship are fine. Sure, it sucks when your lord, for all intents and purposes, takes away your weekend or makes a guy work until he figures out that he's not being compensated, but the assumption is that the underlying power structure isn't even worth addressing. Just get a better job. The difference really can be boiled down to this. Office Space's ending says you can find better conditions for yourself, but I would prefer something along the lines of we can make better conditions for everyone. Now, if you're like me and you know that you're vaguely anti-capitalist but you don't want to read theory, I'll nudge you towards some creators that go into more detail than I'm able to. Some More News, Step Back, and Knowing Better are all great channels that do deep dives into specific topics. And two recent videos from Some More News, The Past, Present, and Future of Work, and Unions and Strikes Are Good, are great resources to learn more about some of the ideas expressed in this video, as well as stuff that I didn't have time to get to. For daily and weekly news and commentary, I like Secular Talk, The Majority Report, and I gotta shout out fellow Michigan podcast Head in the Office. Links to these shows will be in the description. And now for my stuff. I upload videos like this on this channel every so often, so make sure you're subscribed if this is what you're into. And turn on notifications too, since I don't really post that often and YouTube is kind of bad about sending out notifications to people. I have a podcast because of course I do, so go check that out, link in description.
But I think he should have, like, when he stopped the van and saved her, I think he should have been like, fucking ow!
Be like, wow,
Owie.
Milk really does make your bones strong. Gotta go.
It turns out just to be like product placement for Got Milk. Just like,
it does a body good.
And he just like looks at her and says the worst like lines like, Got Milk. And just like walks away.
$1 a month on my Patreon gets you early access to episodes as well as any updates on future videos. And in short, the Industrial Revolution was a mistake. Okay, bye.